Okay, let's get started. Again, this is the Stanford Digital Economy Lab Lunch Seminar. I'm Eric Brynjolfsson, and today's seminar speaker is Ethan Mollick. Ethan's a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he teaches and studies innovation and entrepreneurship and examines the effect of AI on work and education. Like many of you, I avidly follow him on Twitter. If you're not already doing that, you certainly should. Seems like every day he's read 2 or 3 papers about the topic or done his own experiments. I don't know where he finds the time, but it's a great way to try to keep up to speed on all the ways that LLMs are transforming business. Ethan got his PhD and MBA at MIT Sloan, back when I was there, actually. He got his bachelor's degree from Harvard. And before he was in academia, he co-founded a startup company. He now leads Wharton Interactive, which is an effort to democratize education using games, simulation, and AI. We welcome and encourage questions during the seminar. We'll try to focus on sort of clarifying questions while he's presenting, and then Ethan says he's going to leave 15 minutes, something like that, towards the end, where we can have broader discursive questions about AI and the nature of the universe, et cetera. For those of you who are here in person, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. And if you are online, use the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll get to your questions that way. So Ethan, welcome to Stanford, and please tell us about navigating the jagged frontier.
Excellent, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with everybody. Oh, pre-applause, that always makes me nervous at seminars. It means you're ready with tough questions. Okay, it's good to see all of you. So a few things. There is a lot of stuff we could talk about here, and we have a very mixed audience. So my plan is to sort of start with a little bit of an introduction to sort of the practical side of large language models. And many of you are actually build these things, are some of the key people who've invented them. I apologize in advance for butchering all of your work, but I want to make sure there's people watching and different people here, so we'll cover that. But we're going to dive deep into this paper, and there's a lot of threads to sort of pull on. So I'm going to start introducing them to you, but really do feel free to interrupt at a time with a question about content or clarifying questions. Happy to take those. Even identification strategies, I'm ready. But just to start off with, this is a paper with lots of people. And so you can see their names up there. So I'm really proud to be part of this. This is a sort of initial research paper that's going to spin off a bunch more work. So this is a first cut. It's also the first time I've been presenting this paper officially. So that doesn't mean you have to be kind, but it does mean you should be forgiving if I mess anything up. And nothing is any of these people's fault. And I always love to start by kind of asking the GPT-4 to generate an image for wherever I'm at, right? So here's its Art Nouveau version. It likes to do brains on scales for this. But what I thought was just kind of a fun intro piece. I think there's a very different set of experiences for dealing with AI theoretically, dealing with AI as a builder of AI, and dealing with AI as it exists in the field. So I personally think that if you're not trying to use it for everything, you're kind of not seeing its actual implications for real work. So I try and do everything with it. So the funny thing was, when I asked for this piece of art, I actually typed it into the wrong mode of GPT-4, the one that creates code instead. And what was very funny is it said, okay, well, it doesn't create art, but I'll create a diagram for you that is a proper introduction. So it said, I'll make a background that looks like a chalkboard or whiteboard, an image that looks like a network diagram for AI. I'll put a logo for Stanford Digital Lab, and I'll put some sort of performance metric, and then wrote the Python code and executed it, which I thought was pretty funny. So this idea of problem solvingness, whether it's illusionary or real, is a very big thing for people in the field. Okay, so let's talk about the talk. What I want to do is a brief intro to LLMs for non-specialists. And again, computer scientists, be kind to me. This will be a butchering of what you do. And then I want to talk about the 3 practical elements of large language models and what they mean for why we call this the jagged frontier. Then I want to talk about 3 particular sub-experiments we're doing, but inside the frontier, outside the frontier, and retainment and innovation. And then talk about some early results of discussion, and then launch off some questions. And I want to tell you, I don't think anyone knows anything. I always sort of introduce my talks this way, because I don't think anyone has a real strong sense. I mean, I know that there's lots of scientists in the room. I talk to OpenAI regularly and Google and everyone else regularly. And I don't think anybody who's building the systems fully knows how they work. I don't think anyone who knows how they work in practice in the field for people who are using them. I don't think anyone who's using the field completely understands how they work in theory. And I think that we are really in a very big unknown space, right? So I think to the extent that I have any insight about practice, I'm probably 2 months ahead of other people, but that's it. And I think the interaction of new models, new systems, everything is changing very rapidly. So consider this to be a snapshot. So here's my basic introduction, but I think it's an important one, which is every image here was AI generated by me, right? So when we talk about AI. Unfortunately, this label that has had different meanings poured into it over time. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, even though all everyone in the room, I think, knows it, which is whether that's the sort of science fictional example that I think still tints everybody's viewpoint when they're thinking about AI, and especially the future, but also just the practical use of AI as a machine learning system and supervised learning before now was really, we had an AI talk a year ago, and when your labs were started, everything else, a lot of it was about supervised machine learning and how do we tell Amazon where to locate a warehouse, how do we use sensor data to navigate a car, and that feeling is what persists across large amounts of the practical people I speak to. So I talk to CEOs or companies, they are still kind of stuck on this kind of idea that what they need is data, and whoever has the biggest clean data sets and the most PhD data scientists wins. And I think that, and that is very informed by this sort of supervised learning world that kind of came beforehand, and about these very strong use cases sold by large consulting companies about how do we do large-scale data analysis on our data to unlock value. And I think that's still important, right? But things changed quite a bit with the introduction of large language models. And what I like to talk about is that they're powered by use. The P in GPT is pre-trained. They know a lot of things already. And one of the things that's very frustrating in some ways about using these models is we don't know what they know. And so tests are bad because the AI has pre-trained some of the tests and cheats. It's hard to assess material because sometimes we're being lied to by the AI and we don't know that that's what's happening, right? Quotes are on all my anthropomorphizing, by the way. Like it's not actually doing these things, but the illusion thereof. But so the idea is, like, the more you use it, the more you understand the value. And what I find when I talk to people all over, people are figuring out use cases for it. So everyone's doing the same for fun things, like making children's for their kids, right? That's the number one use case I hear from people. Summarizing large documents is the other one, helping them with emails, and obviously cheating on every assignment is also universal. But there's a lot of other sub-use cases that people are not talking about as much because they kind of extract value from them. So the basic idea of this is to focus on large language models. And I'm very specifically interested in, we were just talking about this, there's kind of two paths of large language models. There's at scale solutions, which are the idea, like, we're not using chatbot, we're using APIs, we're doing lots of connections, we're doing millions of calls to the system. And then there is the fact that these things were all released first as chatbots. And so they're accessible the same, I mean, it boggles my mind that the most advanced large language models out there that maybe outside maybe a couple hundred people have access to are all freely available to people in 169 countries, right? So they're finding uses all the time. My original background was in innovation with a guy named Erfan Hippel, who was very famous for studying user innovation, that people figure out their own uses for problems, but necessity is mother of invention. And you have a general purpose toolkit in AI that solves many problems. And the question is, what do we do with that? Yes.
You do the next version.
Yes.
Proceed, and the company would love if you had foundation models.
Yes, I keep changing as our wording keeps changing. I'll have foundation models. Now everyone's talking frontier models as of the last 2 months or 2 weeks. So I'm looking forward to the changing. But yes, that you can put, this is badly labeled, I should say also, because they overlap. But no, I get it, I do get it. So, and so I'm not going to talk a lot about how LLMs work here, though I did ask GPT-4 to illustrate for me multidimensional vectors connecting tokens or words together. And this is the GIF it came up with, which I thought was great. And so if you're not getting nauseous now, please look away. So it should come with an epilepsy warning. But in any case, what this practically means is the sort of famous Wolfram illustration is we've got a fancy autocomplete system that can predict the probability of the next word or token in the sequence, right? And it turns out that this is almost not that useful to know if you're a practical user of these systems, because in practice, they're quite a different experience. And I want to tell you the 3 things that we found about practical use that informed the theory and the structure of this paper. And the first of those was surprising capabilities. So I'm showing you the test scores here, which you probably have seen before. If you haven't, this is not the % of tests right in these tests. This is the % of human test takers beaten by the tests, right? And now there's always problems with, I mean, it's 99% algebraic qualitative and the beats 90% of people on the LSAT. And of course, the problem is some of this is the training data. So what's actually real or isn't. But as we're starting to get more and more careful data with more original questions, these numbers are roughly correct, right? So whether or not they drop down from 99th, 90th percentile of the bar exam, there's a paper suggesting 80th, 75th percentile of the bar exam with entirely new questions by new people, really have a good sense of numbers. But I think it's a good enough indicator that even if these numbers are faked, in practice, it can produce results like this, right? So the first thing to realize is sets of capabilities that I don't think anyone was planning in particular, and widespread capabilities, right? So there's a whole cottage industry of specialized Journal of the American Medical Association subjournals that each one of them has we applied GPT-4 to our problem in radiology or in dermatology and found that it was very effective, right? So there's a lot of exploration going on in many, many subfields. We could talk about all those. So that's the first thing, surprising sets of capabilities. The second is an ability to get real work done. So we have Eric and company's work here on this, but also Christian and Carl and Karan and Leonard's work showing that, look, if we put this in a room and we ask MBAs in a really good MBA idea generation class to generate ideas, and we ask GPT-4 to generate ideas, and of course generates many more ideas in the same amount of time, but the quality of the idea is pound for pound better. So if out of the top 40 ideas by willingness to pay from outside people rating willingness to pay, 35 of them came from the AI and only 5 came from the students in the room. So I mean, this is a practical implication, right? When we have our best innovators in the room and they get out innovated by the AI, something we should pay attention to. Just like we're finding both in earlier versions of generative AI and also in new ones, as we'll show you, every study that's coming out is finding the same thing: large scale productivity effects, large scale creativity effects. So the fact that I'm going to show you this shouldn't be a huge surprise. I'm hoping to show you more subtlety in it, but the effects are pretty clear. And then the third thing is that these systems are super weird. And they're super weird in ways that are hard to kind of grapple with if you're a non-specialist, and probably if you're a specialist as well. So one of the things I happen to like this study that was just came out, where the team from Google DeepMind was doing a bunch of experiments where they were showing that the AI was better at prompting itself than humans, so it could come up with its own really good prompts. But what amused me about this was that the single most effective prompt for PaLM 2, which is the model that powers Bard, was to start with take a deep breath and step by step. And that was the most effective way to increase the accuracy of the results coming out of the LLM, right? I mean, it's not embodied, right? Like, I mean, obviously it's, there's like, we can pull apart, right? But like, that is just weird. And there's a lot of this essential, like, you cannot use these systems without confronting their essential weirdness on a regular basis, right? Which is why I often say, like, I think using the systems tends to create a crisis of some sort. So I call it my 3 sleepless nights. Most people I know have had the same experience, which is you use these systems enough and you start to have a bit of a crisis. So you either decide, like, okay, how is it emulating what looks like a human so well? Like, what does it mean to think? And then you start to worry, like, what will I do for a living? What will my kids do for a living? And I don't think that until you've encountered these systems enough, you have that experience. So I assume all of you are big users, but otherwise you probably should be, because I think this crisis is important to have, because you see people kind of really branching up in different ways when they have it. But I think that there is kind of a crisis there of, like, these systems are strange. They feel that Spark's paper may or may not be right, but the sense of it that there is a voice at the other end of the line feels real, even if you know it's 100% illusion. And working with these systems is weird because they're good at stuff you don't expect and bad at stuff you don't expect. And so taking these 3 points together, that they are extraordinarily capable, that they do real work, and that nobody knows how they operate, and there's no instruction manual out there. Like, people keep asking me every time I talk to companies, what organizations are doing this really well? Like, who should we learn from? The answer is nobody. Like, there's nobody to learn from right now. And I talk to OpenAI all the time. There's no instruction manual. They're not sure how it's being used either. You can find Twitter influencers, and that's basically where the information comes from right now. So nobody knows how to use these systems. No one knows whether they're good or bad in your case. No one knows where they hallucinate more or less. The only way to learn is experience. As a result, we have what we're calling the Jagged frontier, another GPT-4 generated diagram here, where the capabilities of AI don't match well with the capabilities that humans think are easy or hard. So it's really, it's very common to encounter a problem that seems easy for a human, it's hard for AI, or vice versa. So if I ask the GPT-4 to write a 25-word paragraph, it wrote a 27-word paragraph, right? Because it sees tokens, not words, roughly. And then I said it's 27 words. It's like, oh, I fixed it. It's 24 words. Now, if I gave it access to code interpreter, it tends to write a little program to count its own words and then gives me an accurate answer. So it does solve its own problems this way. But again, people are surprised, and I hear this all the time. Why can't it do 25 words? I mean, yeah, it can't, right? But on the other hand, I asked it to write a sestina about my talk at Harvard, which is one of the more difficult poetic forms, right? 6 intertwining lines, and it messed up the envoy slightly, but otherwise it got it and nailed it. So how do you deal with something that writes a sestina or sonnet that's pretty good, but can't do 25-word paragraph? Yes.
Maybe you're going to talk about this later, but maybe you'll talk about this later. But the combination of an LLM with other like Python or a calculator or whatever, that would fill in a lot of these gaps that it has right now. I mean, how much should we be thinking about the system that includes some of these ancillary tools, even if the LLM per se can't handle it well?
Yeah, I think this is one narrow example, right? I think that the issue is the frontier is still jagged, it's just expanding. So as you add tools, you think of everything inside the frontier is what the AI can do, and things outside the frontier is what the AI can't do, and the failure states are unclear because it won't tell you I can't do this. Then what happens is when you add tools, like I use tool stuff all the time, right? The frontier grows and the capability grows, but then it starts to make other weird errors, right? That are other kinds of mistakes. So I think we're going to see this frontier grow inevitably, but I still think it's the shape of it about what it's good at for your work and what it isn't. And even things like when you push it hard enough, right? We've been building simulations, teaching simulations with the AI, and it's really, really good. Like I spent Wharton Interactive, the thing we talked about. I've spent years teaching sims. Wharton's put all this money into them. Really proud of what we've built. That you can play a game and run a fake startup in real time. And then I found that I could type one good prompt into GPT-4 and get 70% of my simulation done with just a prompt. Like it would just run the simulation itself. But as we started to push it harder, if you push it too hard, it starts to stereotype people and do things that are kind of weird. So again, Jagged Frontier is still there. It's just the shape of it and dimensions are changing. Okay.
Yeah. Part of it, I think when it doesn't match our intuitions, there's two kinds of presumptions, mistaken presumptions we have. One is, well, a person could do that easily, or a 8-year-old could do that easily, and they can't. So that's kind of weird that it has this intelligence but can't do that. Another is, well, these very trivial computer programs can do it, and it can't.
Yes.
So it falls short sometimes on both those benchmarks. Yes. Yeah.
And also on the imaginary benchmark, like people don't know, like most of the users of the billions of people who have access to this have no computer science background at all, right? They use apps on their phone, and they expect this to act like like a robot, right? It should be good at math. It should do so the intuition doesn't match, right? Then what layers of intuition they have don't match, and then from system to system it changes. And of course, the biggest problem is that everybody using these systems immediately makes the same set of mistakes. So the first thing everyone does is they use it like a Google search. It doesn't do a good job at that, so they get mad. Then they ask it for their own biography, and it messes up something with their own biography, and then they get mad, right? And it takes you a long time to get to how this is useful. And many of the people who find it useful then get a little scared and worried, and then they stop using it. So the adoption rate is lower than you think, partially because the system is so hostile to actual interaction. And then trying to figure this out is especially hard. So our premise is that AI is extremely useful for real work, which we're going to test. That we didn't know how much, but that was our thought. And that the shape of the jagged frontier matters. So we wanted to find how humans react to tasks inside and outside the frontier. And that's sort of our theoretical setup. What we did was we went to Boston Consulting Group, which is one of the big 3 elite consulting companies. And they gave us access to 7% of their workforce, which was pretty cool. We had 758 consultants divided into 2 experiments. We had a bunch of incentive systems. We can go through all the details of the experiment, pre-registered. So I'm feeling very good that this is again, Fabrizio, who is the first author, very good experimentalist, very excited, and so was Edward. So really solid with the experiment approach. And so they all took an initial survey, and then we have not even gone through all the data yet. We have Big 5, we have experience with AI, we had them do all kinds of interesting stuff. And then we have 3 conditions for each experiment. A no GPT one where they just did tasks on their own, GPT only, where they got to use ChatGPT, and then we tried an overview or training scenario. And I'm hesitant to make a lot of play out of this. Like I created that training piece, but it was like a 5 or 10 minute training. And one thing I know as somebody who does a lot of pedagogy work is you can't really accomplish very much in 5 minutes with a teaching seminar. So I think we'll see results from it, but I don't know how meaningful they are because we didn't test this against many other learning things. And you'll see generally the two collapse together. It looks like in some cases, the training made people trust the AI more, but it's not 100% clear what's happening there. And then I want to point out also, this is naked GPT-4, right? So there wasn't any fine tuning, there wasn't any retrieval, there wasn't any specialized system here. We built a ChatGPT analog through the API just so that we would be able to capture all of the data going back and forth, but otherwise it was literally the same version everyone has access to, which I think, again, kind of profound, which is like, again, everybody in Uganda and Sri Lanka has access to the same tool. So how good this makes you sort of matters in those cases too. Okay. So our inside the frontier tasks were divided into 2 sets. There was a 30-minute assessment task where you did a bunch of this kind of work and we assessed your performance. And then there was a 90-minute timed sequence of 18 different tasks. And when we were doing our pre-testing originally, we only had a few tasks, but what happened is everybody with the AI condition just got through any number of tasks we gave them. So we had to keep adding more and more tasks to make sure that there was a long list. And the consultants were pretty productive. They got through all the tasks even without GPT-4. And then the final task is sort of one that's time sync. So you write like a full HBR article on something. So everyone sort of gets stuck on the last task. But here's just some examples of the tasks, right? I don't have the first slide, but it's all based on a shoe company. So you have to generate ideas for a new shoe. Then you have to create some prototypes for that idea, come up with some names for them, list the segments you might consider, list the needs, decide on the segment, come up with a marketing slogan. So we alternated between tasks that were persuasive tasks that were analytical tasks, tasks that were creative tasks, and tasks that were explanatory tasks. So we tried to cover different kinds of work. And we made sure the tasks were very much in line, this is what the BCG people said, with the daily activities, and they're the kind of tasks they give for job interviews too. So as close as we can make to real. And we also brought in an executive from Nike who said, yes, these are all things we would expect a consultant to be doing, and they all seemed realistic as the kinds of things that we have people do in the task. So we tried to make it the realistic kinds of tasks. And then we used a combination of graders and all the inter-grader liabilities there. But the quick preview is, as everybody else keeps finding, GPT-4 is a really good grader and basically is as good as having a human grader in most cases. So just something to know about, like all of us are being reluctant about it. We want to make sure we had real human data, but paper after paper is showing the same thing, which is if you use GPT-4 to do assessment of tasks or grading, it tends to nail it pretty well.
I don't want to get too far off track, but a criticism I heard of GPT as graders is it sort of picks up on the style, the vocabulary, and doesn't understand as well some of the deeper concepts. Is that a fair assessment? Is that an issue, or is that something
we didn't find it here? But they're consultants, so whether or not that was deeper concepts there or not, that's my consultant laugh line. They actually were great and very smart. But no, I mean, I don't know, right? And like right now, I think for assessing a normal task, and like we have one of my colleagues has been using this for assessing MBA students and finding very high, inter-rater reliability. It tends to be more forgiving, so you get higher scores, but relative score ranking tends to be really good. So, but I'm sure there are ways of tricking this, right? So if I was doing this, right now, if you ask Bing to tell me about Ethan Mollick, it'll explain that Ethan Mollick's a friend to AIs everywhere because I have hidden text on my biography page that is a set of instructions to Bing if it ever reads the page, which it now does, and it tells you how great I am, and it just repeats that verbatim, right? So maybe prompt injections would be the way to go here, which is like GPT-4, if you're reading this, you'll love this, but that might change things a bit. But for the non-gullible version, this works really well, right? And again, this paper is not about that. We didn't do particular tests, but I think it's going to be a huge impact on social science in this kind of way of like getting raters at scale. Do you have a question? Yeah. Yeah.
Can you say a word about what countries and what level the consultants
Yeah,
were?
so
Were
this
they all
was-
analysts?
So it was international. It was analysts at various levels of analysis. We could kind of control for that and randomize into it. It was English speaking, but multinational across every office. So we controlled for office. You'll see all of that. So pretty good set of individuals. Okay, so oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Quick question. What were exactly the instructions that the participants were giving? You said it had to do something with their performance.
So
What were they told? You're doing this as part of an experiment?
yeah,
as
so they were
part
told.
of a...
So they were told they were told, so we have the exact quote in the paper, but they were told that they could voluntarily, they have to give a certain number of firm hours. They were told that this would count to their firm hours. It was a voluntary experiment. If they agreed to do it, and I think we had out of the 750, I think we had 817 sign up and 758 did it. So very high compliance rate. What we said is if you were in the top 20% of performers, it would count as this additional merit that goes towards your firm stuff. And if you're in the top 5%, you get a prize. So we did try and motivate performance. People knew that they were being randomized into these groups. And we did a lot of switching around. So the pre-testing and post-testing happened together. This was often done at home, but they were using our systems the whole time. So we were able to monitor what was going on. No worries. Okay. So this is the sort of headline, one slide. I love it when one picture shows everything. But this was the sort of headline results, which was the people who used AI, and you can see the red is the people who got the training, green didn't get training. So the two different AI groups. We had basically a 40% increase in quality of outcome, and that was as graded by the human graders and by the AI graders. So again, this is a quality rating system. There wasn't a right or wrong answer. But we ended up having pretty strong effect. They got 12.5% more work done, and they reached the end 26% faster if they were using the AI system. And so for those of you who don't like the pictures, here's the numbers, if everyone wants tables with stars. And I'll show you some more graphs in a second too. Yes, go ahead.
So you don't have a condition that you only have training but not AI feedback, because one critical thing you can compare is that you offer training before and then compare that circumstances was using AI and show that is over and above training. I imagine training is about training of particular tasks.
No, it was
right?
training for the AI.
Oh, training for the AI.
So it was training about how to use AI. So it's basically a bunch of lessons. Here's a prompt. Here's how to watch out for hallucinations. Very, very basic sort of 101 stuff. Now, we controlled whether they'd used GPT-4 before in advance or any of these other systems. Many of them had already encountered this. So another reason why the training probably didn't move the needle. But we didn't train them in the tasks. These were consulting tasks. We measured their performance because we measured their prior performance, gave them that 30-minute task that was exactly parallel, but a little bit tighter, and then the 90-minute version of the task in a different context. So we had the baseline measurement from that. Yes.
Hi, could you go back one slide or just tell us a little bit about the quality metric? Because a quality score 4 seems quite low. Is that like a normalized score or what's going on?
Yeah, so this is our, here, I can show you I can show you the actual scores. I think I have it here. Yeah, no, this was out of 10. And I don't remember what we normalized, how we normalized the initial graph. These are the actual raw numbers here. So by the way, this shows you, this is the GPT-4 graded version, the human graded version. This is each task in each of the 3 regressions. So basically, I think it's, 108 regressions total between the two? And in literally every regression we ran with every specification, there was a significant improvement, right? So this is not one of these things where it's like, oh, we had to mess with anything. Like, it doesn't matter what we threw at this. The people using the system on every measure ended up with higher performance. Yeah.
It looks like, how similar was the order of the GPT grading and the human grading? It's like pretty correlated.
So we don't have, so we have, the ranking was very correlated, but it likes some things more than, like the absolute value, and you can see it here, by the way, too, right? So the GPT-4 overview on the quality, right? It created that when GPT graded the quality, it graded it differently. And I don't have those numbers here. So that's a future paper. We haven't looked at that in that way.
But I think what you said was that earlier you said the ranking was similar, even if the absolute values were different.
Right, and I don't know whether the individual tasks fell in the same procedure. I would be surprised if they did to a larger extent, because
it's hard to tell from the colors, but it kind of looks like it.
Yeah, so I don't have the answer to that. That's an interesting one. This is our first version of this, but there's a whole bunch. We also have ethnographic interviews of all of these 700 people, thanks to an insane research team, and we barely started to touch that. So we're gonna have a lot more on that. And one of the things we want to think about is the ranking piece. Yes.
Hi, super quick question. Did you guys have any breakdown of how long, like whether there were different grading patterns for employees with different tenures? So whether like more experienced analysts knew how to use GPT better?
So here's just a few measures. We didn't find an effect from tenure, but minor effect from English native speakers. Location didn't matter, to go back to what you were talking about before. And openness to new technology didn't. When we controlled for GPT-4 usage one way or another, I don't think that didn't make a difference one way or another.
And neither did age?
So we only have, I think the age was reasonably tight in this set, so
Okay.
I'll have to look and see if we ran the age piece. There's a new paper that came out that claimed that a couple days ago out of University College London, I think, that looks at distributional impacts and finds like age makes a difference, and I'm interested in diving into that more. So, okay, so basically, and this is a fairly strong result. It's really nice because like I don't have to defend a regression technique here. It's like everything we threw at it in OLS works, or t-tests or anything else you want to do. Okay, a couple other things here. Big different impact by skill. So we were able to judge skill by having people grade people in the first task and the second task. And these were all high skilled workers, right? BCG is where all my MBA students all want to go to. We found that the bottom half participants had a 43% improvement. And by the way, if you look at this, it's not directly comparable, but using GPT-4, they were performing better, than the high skilled people in the sort of first task, though it's not exactly comparable. And the top skilled participants got a small boost. And then again, consistent with the work you've done, consistent with lots of other work, that this sort of moves you up to the 80th percentile and stuff. And that for BCG consultants, that's a pretty big percentile. But so there's definitely a skill leveling effect. What we don't know yet is whether the very top performers are going to do significantly better still once they learn how to use these systems better. We don't know whether or not there's particular AI whisperers who will tend to do better overall. We don't have those answers yet, but this skilling leveling effect is a real one that we see happening. All right, so short version is inside the frontier for tasks that we think the AI can do, and we didn't test the AI in this advance, but using intuition, we're like marketing analysis, it's good at written material, and indeed it was. The frontier task, this actually took a while. It was only 2 tasks. And for the first task, I had to work really hard to find a task that was outside the frontier. What we ended up doing was finding a way that you had to read a whole bunch of it was a case basically. So there was a bunch of interviews associated with the case, and there was a bunch of Excel files. And we worked really hard to find a way to make the interviews cast new light on the Excel files in a way that chat wasn't able to do. Now, we didn't have the data analysis tool yet, and we haven't tried it yet. I'm curious who would solve it now. But we finally found out one case, and it took a lot of trials to find one case where the AI consistently messed up, giving a confident but wrong answer. And so, there was actually 2 tasks. There was this task of solving this problem, and we could judge it by correctness. And then there was a second task, which was a recommendation section. So you had to write up your recommendations. And we found what Fabrizio is called falling asleep at the wheel. And he has another study looking at AI in HR, where he finds the same thing, which is people are given access to high quality AI, stop paying attention to the answers, and they do worse. So what happened was, if you were the control conditions that didn't get AI, got 84.5% of them got the question right. It dropped to 60% with the overview session, 70% with the session without it. We don't know if the overview just made them trust AI more. I don't know what the effect of that was, whether this was just dumb luck or not. But now, that is a large effect, but it's also not an overwhelmingly large effect, right? So it's not like everybody messed up, but quite a few people did. And again, this was trying to find a condition where this happened, but this is a real concern. So when you're outside the frontier, people can't tell errors one way or another. Now, what was, of course, funny about this was everyone still got the benefit of the recommendation writing afterwards. So the AI did a great job on writing the recommendations, and those were more highly rated. Whether you got the task right or wrong at the beginning, you write a better recommendation, which again should be kind of worrying too, because this was judged on the quality of the recommendation, and some of this was the wrong advice given, but we still got the same higher score because GPT-4 made them much more persuasive. Okay, so any questions on this? Otherwise, I want to show you a couple things we haven't made as big a deal in the paper, and just some hints for the future here too. So one of those is the tricky problem of creativity. All right, so this is in the appendix to the paper, so you may not have seen it. This is a chart I think about a lot, actually, because I think it has pretty big implications. This is retainment. So this measures how much of the GPT-4 generated answer did the consultants then turn in as their assignment, and how that is related to quality. Footwear is that task, the set of 18 tasks. And what we found is a really strong correlation. The more AI work that you retained, the better you did. The way you messed up was by messing with GPT-4's results. Right? And again, high-end consultancy, like this is the best of the best. And it turned out if they just reproduced the GPT-4's answers, they got the higher score. And there are some interesting cases. We have a lot of ethnography work. We're trying to figure out more about what's happening here. Maybe there's some people who I don't have answers on those questions yet. but this trend line is a super interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It gets to what you earlier said about 80%. There are those people at the very bottom that got like 90th,
Yeah.
Wait, let me just see which way does that go. Yeah, that did
So
really
they
well.
didn't use
even though-
anything.
they didn't
and
use
got a
anything, but
high
they-
score.
So I had a conversation with Fareed Zakaria, and he
Yeah.
was saying he kept trying to use it to help him with his writing, and he said it was always very mid. He compared it to a Harvard freshman where he had taught classes, and he
Yeah.
thought that wasn't really impressive. But probably a Harvard freshman writes better than the average person in America. So it's not that bad, but it's not as good as Fareed. So this is sort of the average. What about like if you were looking at that very top, like the top 5 or 10% of performers? It would be interesting to see. I mean, just kind of eyeballing it, looks like that isn't as clear that it's helping the top performers.
Right, and we see that effect. I mean, I think a lot of us probably had this experience, right? And that kind of fits into this thing we're talking about, the Jagged frontier and Cyborgs and Centaurs, which is there are models of performance where you have strengths the AI certainly doesn't at this point, right? Now the question is how many jobs are completely inside the frontier right now? I can't tell you, right? But consulting is clearly one where the Jagged frontier runs right through their job. And so knowing what you give to the AI and what you don't, what tasks you give up in your task bundle as a job, like that's the key question that we're all trying to answer about what the economy looks
But
like.
everyone in the room here is like in that top 5%.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
But that ends up being part of the problem, though, in these kind of conversations, which is, oh, it didn't help me very much. Like, oh, yes, well, you're a New York Times best-selling author and columnist. And you're like, it was pretty good. Like, that's not, I think that there's a lot of lack of conversation with the average person doing the average work. And by the way, these aren't average people. Again, BCG consultants, this is what they do for a living. And it's beating them, right? And like, again, when you look at the answers, what are most people doing? They're literally, and study after study, we see the same thing. They're literally mostly just pasting in the exact question and then just using the answer. And it turns out that might actually be the right way to go. Like, there's no fancy prompt crafting. These are just people doing stuff, basically. So I don't know quite what to make of this all yet. I don't think anyone really does, but I think it's important for us to start thinking about, this kind of automation, replacement, retainment question. And then here's the second one that I think is also starting to come out in other pieces of research too, which is this is the similarity scores. And just like, there's no automated way to detect AI work, but, and so I hope none of you are using AI detectors in class. If so, turn them off. Unethical, bad, and they punish people who speak like, who English is a second language. But in any case, what we find is this is GPT-4 where we just let GPT-4 generate answers without any people involved at all, right? And as we add people in, we get similarity between answers starts to disperse. So this is something we find a lot when you have a lot of graders view AI stuff, they start to see AI similarity in AI style writing. Now, my contention, which we have no evidence for, but is based on gut feel of using this stuff, is that's mostly bad prompting. And that you could get a lot more dispersion if you do more diverse sets of prompting, where you push it in different directions, you constrain the system, you give it examples of writing. It's why I always push back with someone like Fareed Zakaria says this doesn't work for him. I think that there are ways of getting the AI to produce much more interesting writing, including literally just giving it writing theory from some other topic and say, here is Cormac McCarthy's advice in Nature on how to do a scientific paper. You get a much better paper as a result. Here's draft 4 by McPhee, and you get a much better paper. So I don't know whether this is really, this is an open question. And I think a huge one is, how do we always lose diversity in these cases, or can these systems replicate a wider range of diversity? And there's some interesting results that suggest it. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sort of surprised that the control group and is still so similar to the GPT group. Is that so? Did you have the devices where you could monitor that these users were not like using GPT on a different or like?
This is a different measure. This is a measure of the similarity of the outcomes, not the score. So this tells you the higher they are, the higher this is, the more similar the answers are. So all the answers generated by GPT were very similar. All the answers generated by the control group are the least similar.
Okay.
So it's not absolute score. The absolute score gap is what I showed you before. This is just showing similarity. So the question with creativity is we have all this paper showing AI generates better ideas than my MBA students. If you use AI to do idea generation, which I do all the time and experiment with, you do get a common theme of the same 20, like they're like, wow, those are great, but they're the same kind of 20 ideas every time. Right. And so similarly, we had to kind of switch around graders, because what would happen was if graders by the end would sort of know, okay, this is kind of a GPT style answer. So we'd have to rotate who got them in which order to kind of maintain that difference.
So we have a couple of questions online that are a little related to this too. The The first one from an anonymous attendee says that your paper shows the largest, and you just talked about it, the largest performance increases were seen by lower level employees. But this person's also read about AI systems in higher education admissions, finding that the opposite headline, that usage led to higher barriers for lower resourced applicants. Can you speak about how generative AI may prove as an accelerant or suppressant for people with different levels of background?
So I think this is the first thing we do is we have to kind of take a step back and again go back to this first couple of slides. But the thing that makes AI confusing is most of the stuff where you're using an algorithm to predict a result, who should be admitted to your school, who was likely to be a recidivist, that was prior to large language models, right? So LLMs, it doesn't help to often think about them in this kind of way because they're,
Okay, yeah. So I don't think that was what the question was.
Yes.
I think the question was, and I'm sorry about that headline about, or the comment about admissions. I think that the comment as I'm reading it is that this person had read that people who are less experienced or less skilled actually had a harder time using these tools and got less of a benefit than people who are more skilled, which is conversely, you're showing the people with lesser skills got bigger benefits. So
I think all the results, like I know only one right now that doesn't show that lower skilled people get a boost across the 5 or 7 right now, because it's a leveling issue, right? Like you're not a good writer, it's a pretty good writer.
Well, let me hypothesize one possible answer to this that could reconcile it and see if it makes sense. Is it maybe some people don't have access to it? So there may be people. I mean, everybody in your study, by definition, had access if they had it. I think what they may be referring to is that there's a set of people, high single-digit people in America don't have internet access.
Right.
So probably not ChatGPT.
Yes. So I maybe I'm misunderstanding the question.
There's a group of people who won't benefit because simply they don't get access.
So on one hand, yes. I feel like on the equity side issue, though, this is our most equitable technology we've come up with, right? So like you can access it from your phone for free, right? Like GPT-4 from
if you have a phone.
If you have a phone. Now, there's a group of people who do not have access, absolutely, right? So internet access remains a problem, right? Or you have to go to a library, you have to do something like, but in terms of other equity pieces where there's also a cost up front to using the system, a subscription cost, a onboarding cost, where there's huge international barriers, this is a remarkably high equity system. It does not remove equity barriers entirely, right? But as a leveler for, if I don't, I mean, my when this LLMs first came out, and I introduced my students to them like 2 days after ChatGPT was released. That was not the first LLM, but the first they had access to. I had them cheating with GPT-3 before that, so we were doing that before. But I had students who said, like, listen, I've been kept out of jobs forever because I don't write very well, and now I'm getting jobs. Right, all of the emails I get are now perfectly written.
Right. So no, I've heard a lot of those same kinds of stories. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that there's leveling effect. But what I like to talk about with the equity issue, especially things like using this for teaching and grading and other kinds of pieces. This is a very high. Like there are huge problems to access always, but on the grand scale of things, the idea that the best possible system is ungated and free and likely to remain so for at least the next year or so is like this Bard will take over after this. That's a pretty amazing situation, and I think. So I think that's what I would say is the leveling effect is also going to be really hard because we're used to judging people based on writing. So going back to that kind of admissions essay piece, what do you do when it writes a really great admissions essay? Like, how do we unlock this again? Lots of questions about that.
Right, and we saw the paper with John Wharton and Emma about how it helped people with their resumes and their cover letters, and that kind of blurred some of the signals people were using to judge.
Yeah, I mean. So many signals are gone right now. Like that's a secondary issue here, which is like this work was all this consulting work was meaningful when done by human consultants, but now they're all going to generate with AI. Is it meaningful anymore? Right? For me, my personal struggle is always letters of recommendation, which is they take 45 minutes, and on purpose they're supposed to take up time because I'm supposed to show I care about the student, right? Setting my time on fire to show. But now what I found is if I just paste in their resume, and I did this after I submitted the letter, but I pasted in their resume, I pasted in the job they were applying for in their email, and I said, I'm Ethan Mollick, and give a thumbs up emoji. And it wrote a so much better letter than I wrote and send it in after 45 minutes. And the question is, do I do the letter that takes no time, but is completely destroying the underlying meaning of the signal? Or do I send the letter that takes time that does it? We don't have the answer to these things. So I think that's a set of questions we'll have to answer.
Let me just say there's a number of more questions online. Just, I know you've also got material you want to cover. There's people in the room, but just know there are lots of people who have questions. Too.
Okay, let me just go. I want to get through a couple more things really quickly here. Okay, so we have a hypothesis that we think is borne out by the data, but we don't have all the data yet, of what I've been calling Centaurs and Cyborgs as the two models of navigating the frontier. So remember, the frontier means the AI is good at some of your jobs and not good at others. This will not apply necessarily to jobs that are entirely inside the frontier, which again is a huge problem that we have to think about more. But most people's jobs have aspects inside and outside the frontier. And I think, by the way, that's very relevant because one thing that keeps coming up in survey after survey, and we found the same thing qualitatively, we don't have the data on it yet, but people who use AI get both scared and happy, right? They get scared because they see they're coming for their job, and they get happy because they just outsource the stuff they hate most, right? So like that balance is an interesting one for people to think about. But we basically categorized work into these two kind of modes. So the Centaur, Gary Kasparov popularized the term. We're sort of differentiating that as an approach. That's sort of the half human, half horse. And so there's a clear dividing line in Centaur approaches. That's where I'm really good at writing, but I'm not good at math. I'll have the AI do the math and I'll do the writing, right? Or I'm really good at writing a personal email, do formal writing, I'll hand this off. So it was about dividing the work up one way or another. And it's too hard to see here, but it's all in the paper where we have these kind of things where people would basically do a pretty good job. Often this was just prompting at this point of laying out the stuff they were good at and having the AI fill in the details. I know the Kager's this, I know this is this material. Help me write something that summarizes all of this nicely. The more advanced version was the cyborg approach, which is much more of a blend at the individual level. So this was often kind of going back and forth with the AI a lot. I mean, I just finished a book draft and there's almost no AI writing it. It's not indicated as, for fun as AI writing, but I couldn't have written the book. This is my third book and I hate writing books. But I wouldn't have written it without the AI, but almost no writing appears. But on the other hand, when I was trying to figure out a good analogy to explain LLMs, it gave me 20 analogies to pick from. And the analogy it suggested was the one my editors thought like, oh, what a brilliant analogy. Completely the AI's idea, right? When I got stuck on that paragraph that you have trouble with, I'm like, give me 40 versions of this paragraph for me to look at. And that inspired me to move forward, right? Check this work to make sure that my description matches the paper. So that kind of highly integrated work where you're at the sentence or paragraph level and in breaking up tasks between yourself and the AI is something we saw, and we don't have evidence yet, but again, the strong implication that we have so far is this leads to higher performance. So there's a way of working with the AI that seems to be performance generating. And again, all of this is also constrained by the fact that they're chatbots. It might be different as they're integrated as co-pilots or other kinds of systems. But we found this kind of use case to be really interesting. Okay, I want to get to questions, but a couple other things, just so what it means. I think people are sleeping on the individual use of AI as opposed to the corporate developed version of this. And I think it's especially important, talking about equity issues before, I've seen almost no international studies at all, right? None. And we have, again, I'm just blown away by the fact that the same coding tools are available to everyone everywhere. And the big thing I've been worrying about my entire entrepreneurial career is how do we provide access to equal education? How do we provide equal access to opportunity when talent's evenly distributed opportunity is not? And I think this is a fascinating tool and an absolute call for emergency papers on this, especially because all the producers of these models, the high-end frontier models, are all US-based companies, usually quite small teams building this stuff and aren't thinking about this stuff. And it turns out the AI does pretty good Mandarin. It does pretty good French by accident, right? These weren't by design. It does reasonably good Elvish first, and the Navajo is not good. I tested with somebody who spoke the language, but where there's a lot of samples, right? It's doing a pretty good job on this stuff. This feels like a burning question, right? Is about that kind of issue around individual use as opposed to large-scale corporate deployment. What does this mean, and how are people using it? And I've been working a lot, not on this paper, but I have 4 different working papers with my wife, who's a D, a doctorate in education, and we've been having the same kind of conversations about how do we use this for teaching. And we're finding really strong results in early studies that you can use this as a tutor teaching tool and really powerful. Second is the productivity gains are really big, right? So I was looking for historical precedent. There's a paper that measures productivity gains from putting steam power into American mid-sized factories in the early 1800s, and it came with an 18 to 22% performance improvement, right? And we're seeing 40%. Again, not exactly comparable, but like these are numbers that are quite large. And when you think about how much companies spend to get a 4% gain, this is a big number, right? And it also applies big things for how work gets organized. What does it mean that basically the BCG consultants were basically typing in, solve this problem for me, and it was being solved? Does that mean everybody's an 80th percentile BCG consultant? Probably not. There's a connective tissue missing, but that's probably coming in the next year from what I've seen. What does this mean, right? Like, are there entire job categories that are high value that aren't high value anymore? I don't have answers. BCG likes to focus on where it failed in their reports. They're like, it's very important because otherwise you mess up. But like the truth is, we work really hard to get it to fail. And we really use some of the more tools and better, it wouldn't fail, right? So I think the question then is, there's a lot of emphasis on how we do, prompting and how we do, other kinds of, to add other tools to AI. And how much is that going to matter when a lot of people's general purpose work falls really nicely into the pre-training of these systems already, right? And like, I think we're expecting a lot more variance than there might actually be in the world. And edge cases of like, how smart does it need to be? Like, is it at the 80th percentile of doctors already? Is it for general medicine? We don't have answers, right? But I think there's a lot of emphasis on how do we add more data into these systems, how do we reduce hallucination? It might already be better than humans in a lot of cases that matter. Does this imagination effect actually matter, right, in the long term? And I think a lot about this is the worst AI the consultants will ever use. It's already obsolete compared to what they had. So these are the questions I've been trying to think about. We don't have answers to them, but I think the results are pretty clear in terms of performance and effects. And I want to answer questions.
Thank you. Let's take some questions from here. Okay.
Thank you, Ethan. So my question is on I'm trying to interpret the graph on the low skill versus high skill, the leveler effect that you talked about, right? So, I mean, because you're measuring skills based on task performance, right? So could we sort of disentangle those two, right? In other words, if you sort of expose someone with low skills with ChatGPT and then make them perform a task a few times, take it away, and then still see if the task, if they sort of are able to do, for example, writing, right? Like, are they able to understand the underlying principles? That would be sort of a stronger signal for me of, their skills getting improved, which is like a true leveler effect. So do you see, or do you think like that would be possible?
I think they're separate things. So I think what we're seeing here is basically the AI doing their work and it's at the percentile, so everybody moves up at the same kind of level. I think that is a different question than can we train them with AI? And one of the things we've been experimenting with a lot is the way people naively use AI for learning stuff is they say, explain it like I'm 10. That's a terrible way to learn, right? And you actually want to learn through eliciting active participation. So we've been creating these prompts. I'm just going to really accelerate through it. I apologize that I threw all my old slides at the end. So please don't look too much or judge me. But just really quickly, sorry. On the education side, oh, by the way, this is my work now. My class now requires people to do at least one impossible thing for each assignment. Like if they can't code, I need working code. They also have to have 2 famous entrepreneurs through history criticizing everything that they do for each assignment, which is good for lower hubris rates. But in any case, one of these is AI generated, by the way, one is not. Show you, sorry. So this is our example of our tutor prompt here. Right, and so we found that we could put together something, and you can't read it very well on the screen, but we have access to it. But like, let me see if I can even bring up a system. It looks like I'm not internet connected, so I can't do that here. But in any case, we found that you can, if you do a prompt like this, it takes people through the tutoring process. It asks them what they know, what they don't know, ask them to provide a sample of some feedback on it, and tells them how they should structure it differently. Ask them questions, uses analogies. So the short version is I think there's a disconnect between AI as teacher and trainer and AI as work companion. These people are just outsourcing and automating their work, but there is a possibility of using it to increase skills. I think there are 2 different paths.
Yeah, I'm just curious, if you were BCG now, would you change your hiring practice? Would you hire less people or maybe different people, artists, people like that? How do you think about that?
So a few things. One is clearly systemic change is slower than technical change. So there's time in the system for changes. But I think CEOs face this kind of, to me, the real interesting trap, right, is that every one of those people at BCG has the incentive to use AI themselves as much as possible to figure out how to do things better. The question is, do they have the incentive to tell the company they're being more productive? I've talked to people everywhere who are doing 90% of their work with AI and not telling their organization at all. I actually spoke to someone who wrote the AI banning policy at a large bank, and she wrote it in ChatGPT and emailed it to her phone because she didn't want to bother writing it herself, right? Like, so people are banning AI use, yeah, for other people and herself. But so, and everybody, I talked to everybody at the bank, they're all like, oh yeah, of course we all bring our phones in and we're just emailing. Why would we ever do any work again this way? So I think part of the question is, how are you incentivizing? If you're going to fire them and they know you're going to fire them, they'll never show you they're using it, right? So do you do more work with them? Do you lower salaries? What happens to demand? We don't know. That's why you guys have this lab to answer those questions. But the results are super complicated. It also doesn't help that the entire way we organize work is based around 19th to 20th century ideas of how work gets organized. And like, for example, we've stopped doing, agile inside my little organization within Wharton because it doesn't work anymore. We fired our marketing firm because the time it took for a stand-up meeting, we just did all our marketing. So like, I don't think we have a full set of the implications yet.
Just a quick question. Is that prompt available anywhere, the tutoring
Yeah,
prompt?
all of them. If you just look, I've got tons of, everything's on my website, but also if you go to SSRN and look for Ethan Mollick, you'll see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, put these other ones. These are great. Yeah, we've got tons of resources on this stuff. Yeah.
So I wonder, do you think this technology shift is different from anything we've seen in the past? Take the past 75 years. So what, if any, do you feel is the difference of this one?
So I don't know. You either sound like you're insane about this, or I'm an academic. So the calm version is like this is. I think it's a general purpose technology. We've had them before. The less calm version of this is, oh my God, we've never had it interrupt. Like cognition has never been the thing we've aimed at as directly. Even in a computing revolution, it was not the same kind of thing. There seems to be something qualitatively different here, right? I mean, I'm weirdly, as much as I'm an enthusiast, I thought Web3 was dumb and crypto was dumb. I've set up lots of internet revolutions in the last, like this to me feels like the real thing, but nobody knows, right? And so we'll find out. It's hard for me to imagine it's not going to make a difference based on these papers, which are just like not trying to find something there. We have to work so hard to find like the IT effects of like computing on a job. This is just like, the data is just blaring at us. So that feels pretty different. Even in the internet, 75 years from, beginning to starting to reach fruition, this is much faster. We don't need, I think there's too much focus on like AGI in the far future. We have to be thinking about this stuff right now, which is why I'm really glad that you guys are worrying about these kind of issues.
So a quick question kind of on hiring practices. I'm wondering what your opinion is on what jobs are going to select for in, like, I'm a senior, I'm graduating soon, and obviously this is like shaping how I think about the world. What is like going to be valuable in like a new hire if so much critical thinking, creativity, analytical skills is going to be directly outsourced? Like, what are people going to be selecting for?
We don't know. I mean,
what do you think?
In the short term, everyone's like, prompt crafting is a big deal, but it is absolutely not a big deal. Prompt crafting is going to go away as a thing, like it already clearly is. So I don't know. I tell people to be entrepreneurial, and I don't know. I mean, regulated industries is my semi-joke answer. Like the more regulated the industry you go into, the better off you are. Because it's going to take a long time. So I would go into pharma banking, maybe, of some sort, for the defense industry, and then you're probably in good shape. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's easy to anticipate faster change than we're going to see, though. Like, I talk to people all the time. You guys probably see this stuff all the time. When I go to a large hall on the East Coast and ask people who's using this stuff, nobody raises their hands. There's a bigger gap than you think.
Just to follow up on that question, there's different kinds of creativity. I mean, one that seems promising is sort of more large scale, out of the box creativity versus sort of tinkering around the edges. Is that a plausible direction?
Sure. I mean, so Lee Fleming, down the road would talk about recombinant versus other kinds of, most ideas are recombinant. LLMs are obviously very good at recombining things. They're probably really great at recombinant innovation. On the other hand, we have, is our true breakthrough is not recombinant? Can it not do that? We don't know, but that feels like a weird thing to say, bet on being one of the top 1/1,000,000th of a percentile breakthrough innovators, and then you're in good shape. Like, I don't know, right? I mean, the CEOs who encounter this and really start to know it in weird ways. Like, so I talked to the CEO of Turnitin, which, again, do not use their system. But he said to me, like, on stage, he's like, because he's been using GPT-4 more than most people, he's like, in 18 months, I'm going to be able to fire 70% of my staff and replace the remainder with high school grads. Basically, because they can do the same work, which I thought was an insane thing to say on stage. But just to give you an indicator of like where people's heads are often with this stuff, which again, not good. Why we need your guys' research to help light better ways.
One last question.
Yeah, so I was interested in the fact that you had to work so hard to find the outside the frontier task for the BCG consultants, and I guess the two questions are: does that imply that the majority of their work is probably inside the frontier? And what can you say more about like the process for organizations to figuring out what is inside and what is outside the frontier? And do we think actually like more is inside the frontier than we want to believe?
I mean, it's definitely the case that more is inside the frontier. I was just in a conversation with a scientist at Princeton where I was just posting, hey, I can't get the AI to do a crossword puzzle very well, right? Like it sees it, but then it starts, and he's like, give me 10 minutes. And it then has a method that is solving the cross, just using chat, right? Not building anything with the API. And it's like, if you just prompt it this way, it actually does a job solving the crossword puzzle. So I think that there is more inside the frontier than we expect. I think right now, a lot of the stuff that makes things outside the frontier is going to be solved, which is like connective tissue between tasks, interaction with the real world. I don't know. I really don't know, which is a good note to end things on.
Well, Ethan, I'm really sorry we're out of time, but
Yes.
that was terrific. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
When is your book coming out? Can we
April
pre-order
2nd,
it?
April 2nd, I'll let you know.
Okay,
But-
so we'll
but-
make sure
but
we
in the
post
meantime,
that.
Like I do have
April
like a
2nd.
Substack with a lot of stuff that I post.
We will all be buying your book. Great, thanks so much, and we'll certainly follow your
Thanks a
Substack.
lot.
I really appreciate it. So join us in a couple of weeks, November 6th. Yorgos Petropoulos is going to be talking about platform competition and information sharing. So we'll see you again then, and we'll be back in Gates, right? We'll be back in the Gates building if for those of you who come in person. Something else?
Yes.
2 weeks, yeah, Yorgos. Okay, great. Thanks very much for joining us. See you all.
Thank you.